want to welcome everybody to the Sacramental Charismatic podcast. My name is Luke Geraty, and today we are jumping into, I guess, the Easter version of this podcast, and going to be discussing the resurrection with my friend Jeff. Jeff, it's good to see you. Jeffrey, how are you?
Glad to be back, Luke. I'm glad to be here.
I'm going to call you Dr. Jeff because that's
more
appropriate.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. But
you earned it. So
between you and me, Jeff is good. So yeah, for my student,
I don't want to get the listeners to think that they're on a first name basis with you. I'm the go-between. Hierarchical of authorities.
I understand.
So you've been on two different episodes. We got to talk about, I guess we talked about Calvinism and Arminianism a couple episodes again.
Yep.
Yeah. I was tempted to I have an Augustine shirt. I was going to wear it for you, but I decided that I shouldn't be so rude.
Yeah. No taunting here. So
yeah, no taunting. Exactly. We got to keep the friendship going. So yeah, you're a philosopher and you teach, just for anybody who hasn't listened to previous episodes, you teach at a university. It's not a Christian university, so you're in the philosophy department, and also have an opportunity to, at times, because you are a follower of Jesus, you get to share your faith. And what's that look like on the campus? Is that exciting?
Yeah,
is that
it's
nerve-wracking?
Good. If it's it's a different thing in the classroom. Then it's nice that I teach philosophy, so I'll teach a course like in philosophy of religion or intro to philosophy, and arguments for the existence of God. I mean, that's just standard, intro stuff. Mm-hmm. So I get to talk about things that are related to the existence of God and to Christianity, just as a part of so it's not like if you're a chemistry prof, you might say somewhere along the line, have it on your syllabus or whatever and let people know that you're a Christian, but it's just not going to come up, in the course of the semester. For me, at least for most of the courses that I teach, it just comes up, pretty organically, which is great.
Yeah. That's cool. It kind of leads to some pretty fun conversations, I'm sure, sometimes. Yeah.
And there's other times where I'll give like more popular talks on campus and some other campuses around for some of the parachurch organizations. And then I really am laying it on the line. I'm saying making a much clearer case.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I mean, I just was thinking right now as you were talking about how I think it was like my freshman intro to philosophy class that probably sparked a lot of interest in theology from there. That's where I was like, I think I want to study theology, and changed my major from general ed to.
I did not like my intro class. My bachelor's degree is in electrical engineering, so unlike a lot of philosophers who start in philosophy, I did not. I took one class my first semester, freshman year, intro to philosophy. I did not like that class. And so I didn't get back into philosophy again until graduate school.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, to be more specific. And, I guess before we jump into some of the, the technical apologetics related areas, because that's an area that you've have a lot of great thoughts on. I guess maybe you're a follower of Jesus. I'm a follower of Jesus. We both, I think we both have said that we do believe that the creeds, they have some weight. They might not be scripture, but they have some helpful things.
They get a vote. They just don't get a veto.
I liked how you said that. Yeah, I liked how you said that. But the centrality of the resurrection is front and center in the creeds. But then I think what you just said there, I mean, when you're looking at scripture, it is overwhelmingly, a decisive moment in human history. And for Christian faith, I think, we would say there is no such thing as Christianity without the death. Well, I guess the life, death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. And then I would add the ascension as being a important thing too, but that's for my Calvinistic friends. Okay, not you.
Sure. Yeah, okay.
But, so the offering was acceptable, but I'm curious about why do you see the resurrection as sitting at the very center of the Christian faith? Like, why is that such an important topic for the church to not just have a day of the year? Because I think that is kind of the thing I think about sometimes is like, oh man, if Easter is the only time we're really leaning into the resurrection, we're kind of missing the heart of the Christian faith. Why would you say it's more important than that?
Well, I'll just start like autobiographically. So this was pivotal for me. So I was not, I guess I was raised a nominal Catholic, but didn't know anything, theologically. We actively in my house and extended family did not talk about anything religious. I did not understand exactly what Easter was until sometime in elementary school. It's really embarrassing. I did not get it, that what historically it was about. So by the time I was in high school, I was a pretty content atheist. But it was I'm not an apologist. This is not what I publish on. It's not my main thing. But it was apologetics. It was stuff about the resurrection specifically, that kind of made me sit up and take notice. It's like this because what I thought was it's just a matter of faith. And that's even people that I knew at the time, they really couldn't tell you why you should believe, the resurrection act. It's just, if you're a Christian, this is one of those things you believe, and you take it by faith. And so that means you really can't analyze it or criticize it or anything. But people who knew some apologetics, like knew just old Josh McDowell stuff, back from the 70s and 80s. And could actually make a rational case that, no, look, the resurrection is a historical event. Like this really happened. And you go through some of the arguments, and I know we're going to talk about that some today. But it did. Before I wasn't ready to accept Jesus as my Lord, but the idea that Jesus of Nazareth, like, was there a greater than 50-50 chance that he rose from the dead? I remember I was driving down the street and just realizing that I think, actually, probably, not absolutely, probably, this guy rose from the dead. And, when you're an atheist, that's kind of a problem. That does not fit. So certainly in terms of, just making a rational case for Christianity itself, I think the resurrection is pretty pivotal. It certainly was the case for me, and I know it's anecdotally that's true for a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, that reminds me of so I think I had been pastoring for maybe 6 years, and our church that I previously served at had this, like, we had coffee and things like that, and I think we were trying to be very welcoming, and there was some table seating that was kind of in the back of the sanctuary, and there was this guy one Sunday who came, and I walked up to him just to introduce myself to him, and I was like, hey, my name's Luke, and he introduced himself, and he said, I'm just here for the coffee. I was like, don't and like, so somebody had invited him, I was like, oh, okay, cool, and for the next, I think it was probably around 8 weeks, I would see he was there every Sunday and was sitting drinking his coffee, and I would always go say hi, and but he was very much like, don't try to sell me on your religious stuff. And I think it was 8, maybe it might have been 10 weeks. I walked up to him one Sunday, and he kind of came up to me, but he's like, flagged me down, and I started talking to him. He's like, hey, I need to meet with you. And I said, oh, okay, like, let's get together. And so we got together for coffee in that week, and he sat down, and he was in a distressed state, because he sits down, and he's like, we need to talk. I think I might be a Christian. And I was like, oh, what makes you think that? And he's like, well, I've been listening, and I've been, kind of talking. And he's like, I think that Jesus was the Son of God, and Jesus was, lived, and he died on the cross for my sins, and he was raised from the dead. And I just remember I was like, yep, you're a Christian. That's what that's what
he's like. Yeah, maybe so. Yeah,
I was like, check.
There definitely are people. I mean, C.S. Lewis was like that. I was not seeking. I was responding to my sister who had become a believer, and so just like to honor her and not make her mad. Yeah, I'll look into this. I'll talk to people.
Yeah.
It's fine. I wasn't afraid to talk to pastors, and I just was pretty sure they were not going to be able to say anything that was going to be useful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that.
I mean, well, look, as an outsider with not a whole lot of
Yeah.
experience, um, and Lewis the same way, C.S. Lewis the same way, just not, wasn't seeking, wasn't looking, but, just, man, you start when you are confronted, and then you have to say something about it. Just like, oh, that does start you down the path.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, I'm glad I made it in. Right. I'm glad I kept going down the path, and the resurrection for me, like I said, that was pretty pivotal.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. That's great. So, yeah, and I think we could add on to that, because we have these personal stories of. I mean, for me, I've had a few times where, going through some difficult, challenging situations. It's I think the reality of what I believe to be a historical event. It actually happened, is comforting. It is encouraging. It is, it kind of empowers a lot of. Even like I think for us in the vineyard, not to get onto a side tangent, but I mean, when we talk about praying for the sick or any of the signs and wonders approach stuff that we got from, Wimber's influence and power evangelism, I mean, there is, you know, great encouragement because we have the same spirit dwelling inside of us. That is part of it, but it also is like God does miracles. And one of the, the greatest miracle is the fact that Jesus is still alive, right? The tomb is empty. So that's great. Well, let's talk. Let's get into some of the more, I guess, the apologetics related aspect of things. Like for you, what or not even just with you, because we both have discussed some of the scholars that we've been influenced by. That are out there. They're just doing a lot of hard work in relation to the resurrection and the historicity and the trustworthiness and, the best arguments. But what are the strongest historical reasons that scholars give for believing that the resurrection actually happened? It wasn't some type of a mythical, legend that grew over time.
Yeah. So the approach that some of your listeners probably have been introduced to, at least some degree or other, it's called a minimal facts approach. So what they're saying is, look, let's start with not me trying to prove to you that the Bible is the Word of God, or even that it's generally reliable. Let's just start with what critical scholars will give us. What will the critical historian, meaning not a non-Christian, naturalistic historian who's an expert, in the first century, what will they allow actually happened? Nothing supernatural, right? They're not going to give you the resurrection. They're not going to give you healing or anything supernatural. But there are things in the Bible that they think are historically accurate. And the answer is, yeah. I mean, there's like 10 things that they'll say, like, just for example, that Jesus of Nazareth, that he was crucified by Roman soldiers. They'll give you that. I mean, because we know the Romans did that. We know that crucifixions were carried out, hundreds, in and around Jerusalem. So the idea that you would have this guy who was stirring up trouble, right, and that he might be executed by the Romans, they're like, sure, they'll give you that. And they'll give you, again, about 10 things along those lines. And so what I do, and I'm following an argument here from a guy named Gary Habermas, who some of your listeners have probably heard. I actually learned that. I was a former student of Gary's. I learned this from. This is not. I'm not giving you original material. Mm-hmm. I'm not published on this, but this is a version of a popular talk, right, that I've given on college campuses. So what Gary says, okay, look, we got these 10 things. And you don't think the resurrection happened, fine. And I can take you through the list if you like. You, the critic, give me an alternative explanation. You tell me what happened, what really happened, other than it being a literal resurrection. And then we'll see, given the things that you already agree that actually happened, that are historical facts, do they fit the facts that you yourself, the critical historian, grant were actually happened? And the kind of the short version of it is that if you go through all the different possibilities out there, like what else might have happened, they conflict with the 10 historical facts, the minimal facts that critical historians will grant actually did happen. So so the nice thing about it is I don't have to prove anything to you. I'm not trying to get you to believe anything. I'm starting with what the critics will allow, and then we're just trying to come up with the best explanation for those facts. And if you're an atheist, if you're a naturalist, the best explanation needs to be something not supernatural. But the not supernatural explanations, they don't work. They always get impaled on one or more of the 10 accepted facts. So that's the outline. That's how the whole thing works. At the end of the day, you go through all the alternative explanations, and it looks like you have two options. You can say, well, we don't know what happened. That's probably, if I were an atheist, that's probably your best bet, is just to say something happened and we know not what. Or it looks like literal resurrection, really seems to be the best explanation. So you just have to tell me what more details you want to talk about. We can go through more of what these 10 accepted facts are, or I give you some examples of like alternative explanations and show you how this works. So I'll leave it up to you how you want to go.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, so I think I don't hear the swoon theory as much anymore.
No,
right.
It's
but
fun,
let's use that as an example, just kind of an example, because I think, that was a pretty popular argument from I guess non-believing scholars for a while.
150 years ago. No, this was very popular. So
yeah, it seemed like it was in a lot of the literature. Yeah. From like the 1800s or whatever.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff, this was a really popular thing to do, during during the time of kind of, German critical realism, critical theory about the Bible, was to come up with alternative naturalistic explanations. And so a lot of these were published at the time.
So what is the swoon theory? And let's just, can you maybe demonstrate
Sure.
how you would do this in relation to the swoon theory?
Yeah, swoon's fun. Okay, so the idea is that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. So he's nailed to the cross. He loses a lot of blood and he loses consciousness, and so they think he's dead. And so they take him down from the cross, and they go and they find this this cave to put him in, and then in sort of the coolness of the cave, overnight, he revives, and he just walks out. Right? He didn't actually die. He just walked out, and then the disciples see him, right, and they think he rose because they thought he was dead, and so they here it starts this theory that Jesus was resurrected, because they thought he had died. So again, if it under this alternative explanation, there's nothing supernatural about it. There's no miracle, and this could explain then, why people would have thought that Jesus rose from the dead. So the thing to do then, okay, is to say, okay, well, what again do critical scholars allow that actually happened in the first century? And let's see if the swoon theory can match up with those. So the first problem for someone who would hold this theory, and again, like you said, this is not very popular today, but it was at one time. Just that first one that I mentioned, the idea that Roman executioners had crucified Jesus of Nazareth. They did this a lot. This was not like the first time they had ever done this, and so they knew what they were doing. They knew how to kill people by way of crucifixion. So this again wasn't a new thing. It is interesting. There are 3 people historically that are reported to have survived a crucifixion. But what had happened was they realized very early on that they had the wrong people. So they put these guys up, and then within less than an hour, they realized that we got the wrong guys. These people should not be. And so they bring them down, and they did survive immediately. Although 2 of the 3 still died because again of the wounds that are inflicted. So you compare them to say like Jesus, who was on the cross for at least 6 hours, and then that was after he had been flogged and the like. The idea that someone actually could have survived an actual full crucifixion just doesn't look very good. And again, the Romans knew what they were doing. Another one I didn't read is that most critical scholars will allow that the disciples believed that Jesus was resurrected, right? They think that the disciples were wrong. They think maybe it was a hallucination or something else. But will you allow that the disciples believed that Jesus rose from the dead? And so, they'll grant that. But the question then is, did the person who walks out of the grave, the person under the swoon theory, who revives and then stumbles out of the grave, does he look like the risen Savior of the world, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
what did Jesus himself say? Did he say he had been raised from the dead? And then, like where did he go? Because you can't have anything supernatural here, so you can't have an ascension, on the swoon theory. So
Yeah.
it seems like if it was just swoon, he should have went back to. We should have a record of him going
Yeah.
back to Nazareth and people following him, and we got nothing like that, right? So swoon just doesn't cover the facts that the critical scholars will give you. And then, like I said, this was really popular in the 1800s. We just know a lot more about shock and blood loss than we did, back then. So, like the idea of a cold, damp cave being a great place to recover, not so good. ER doctors are not putting people in refrigerators these days. It is not an effective, medical procedure. So, again, for those reasons, for medical reasons, and then again the things critical scholars will give us, I don't think there are any swoon theorists out there. I mean, I'm sure somewhere on the internet, I bet you could find one, but
Well, I think, as you were talking about, I haven't heard, well, it's interesting for a couple reasons. I think every major book on the resurrection still addresses the swoon theory.
Yeah.
But it's mostly because it was such a, I think it was kind of like the standard objection for a while. And then I wonder if part of the wisdom in doing that is because I could totally see, younger, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but if I was a younger atheist and I'm exploring these and I'm looking for alternative explanations to it, the swoon theory is one of those things that I might rediscover, because it does seem like there is a historical pattern where certain things, come back to the forefront of being. Yeah, it's like, and then people, but I mean, the swoon theory has been largely debunked by, I don't know any scholar today who is a atheist that would ever use it, because it just doesn't work.
Nobody with any credentials, uses this. So I'm sure you can find someone on the internet who's got it.
Yeah,
but
I'm sure it's on TikTok.
It has to be, because everything is, it's like the multiverse. It's all, everything that can be is out there.
That's right. Yeah. So in that example of the swoon theory, you using the minimalist argument, you just kind of pick away at each one of those potential alternative explanations, and it seems, because I've thought about in apologetics stuff, like when I've done sermon series, is kind of largely influenced by Tim Keller's the reason for God type of, answering some of those those questions. I've always explained it as like, for me, after you weigh the evidence, which Christianity invites us to do, that's one thing that I think you and I both would say. That's one difference between other religions, is that we don't need some illumination or revelation. Paul said, hey, there's 500 people that saw the resurrection. Go out and you can talk to them.
It's not a leap of faith.
Yeah, it is not a leap of faith. That's right. There's reason. So I always describe it as for me, I think the most reasonable explanation for the empty tomb is a supernatural, miraculous resurrection, because all the other alternative, they seem to fall apart. So using a minimalist, you're essentially just kind of taking each one of those cases and then just weighing it against the accepted, because again, like you said, I don't think there's any historians of Roman, crucifixion that would suggest that they weren't professional executioners.
Right.
They were, so much so that they generally, like, even they would have broken Jesus's legs in the, in the gospel accounts if they thought he was still alive.
Yeah.
Right. That was like, let's get this show on the road so we can go have dinner, or, whatever. So,
And then you have, and these go beyond the minimal facts, right? But, if you take a few more things that in the Gospels as historical, they put a spear in his side, they want to make sure. So, it looks like if you allow a little more, little beyond the minimal facts, a little more historicity to the Gospels. They really did make sure that he was dead. They did.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because I think so. And I'm kind of curious about, so using the minimalist argument, is that essentially like, if you're doing apologetics work, and some of this is like, we're talking about it from a variety of perspectives too, like maybe from you being a philosopher who who might be presenting something that, is being heard by a bunch of students or something is a little bit different than like me having coffee with somebody who has questions, right? Like there's different audiences and different goals, I guess there. But do you kind of think about in the narrative of somebody coming to faith, as they're kind of exploring this and they're listening to podcasts and they're maybe reading some articles and they're watching some YouTube videos or whatever, is the minimalist argument essentially getting somebody to the point where they're more open to the next step, in their journey? It's just making it like, hey, this is a plausible, where this isn't crazy. Like, you don't have to take a leap of faith. Is that essentially kind of the goal?
Absolutely. No, yeah. And even stronger than that, that if they, it forces them to do some work, to try to come up with like, what else might have happened if it wasn't literally, and just show whatever they come up with just isn't going to, work given the things that I'm trying to convince them of, the minimal facts are not thing that just that, the critics are going to allow.
Yeah.
I think it's great, especially for a person like myself, who just assumed, I really thought that really all of religion was just psychological, emotional, sociological. People like getting together, and so it was fun to get together. But the idea that there's anything, any sort of rational basis to it, and even the way Christians would talk a lot of times, they would say, if you, I knew Christians still do that, would, if you raise some sort of, they hear some sort of objection, then they'll just, well, you have to take it by faith. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That did nothing for me because I thought faith is just wishful thinking. So to kind of blow through all those stereotypes and say, no, look, we can actually make a rational case for what we're talking about. That just kind of changes the paradigm in a lot of ways. Like, oh, I didn't know that's what you guys did, right? I thought, you're just going to tell me you got to accept the Bible and because it's the Word of God and go from there. But I didn't realize that we could actually have a rational conversation, especially someone who's more, I don't know, they think of themselves more scientifically oriented, right? More empirical, and they want to, they want evidence and the like. For those people, people come into the kingdom in lots of different ways. But for people more like me, who again have these stereotypes, you gotta give them something. Yeah, you got to give them something concrete, to step a foot on. And that isn't, you're not going to argue them into the kingdom, but you got to give them some place to stand where it's not just a leap of faith. So yeah, I think it's really helpful.
Yeah. And as a sidebar, just for any listeners, this is coming from more of a pastoral perspective. I think it would be really intelligent and wise and helpful to like plan your a sermon series. Like I don't know, maybe every 2 years. That's what we've kind of done, where we'll do a 4 to 8 week apologetics, essentially making a reasonable case for Christianity and in answering the big objections. I mean, I think the problem of evil, how can a loving God allow human suffering? What about, I think it was like, gosh, it might have been 20 years ago now, I think about it, but there was a book that came out that talked about like how the 20 objections that millennials had at that time. And those are different than the objections that are happening now, but also not entirely. It's just kind of interesting. But yeah, because we've seen in our local church, every single time I've done that, what I've learned is that you do have people who are exploring. I mean, this last time we did it, we had multiple people make first-time decisions to follow Jesus and get baptized because they, came to a place where they were like, okay, this does make sense. Follow Jesus did these things for me, and I want to, respond to that. But also, there's a lot of people in our churches that, even though they go to church every Sunday and they would check the box of Christian, they are maybe still a little skeptical, and are still like not quite, I don't know about that. Like, right. Like, oh yeah, I believe Jesus loves me, but I don't know about the Bible. I don't know if I can trust the Bible or whatever. And then additionally, giving people in the congregation meat to chew on, and then also stimulating their own ability to have these conversations with their friends, neighbors, coworkers, family members, so that's why I don't know why I'm saying 2 years, but it seems like that's how it's worked out here. Every 2 years we do a sermon series on that.
Yeah, you hear this thing where like millennials, they want stories, they don't want facts. And I'm like, everybody everybody wants facts. They just do.
Yeah.
You need information to get around in life. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might want a story, I understand, but you got to have some information. And so
Yeah.
no, I still think there's a place. Maybe it's not as important today as it was, 30 years. I don't know. I really don't. I'm not a good judge of that sort of thing. I still see, a demand, or if not a demand, that a good reaction to this material
Mm-hmm.
when it's presented. Um, so yeah, I think there are some. You don't have to be a specialist in apologetics. I think you need
Mm-hmm.
some stuff there in your back pocket that you know well enough that you can present.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is one of them. That it's not the only one, but this is one
Yeah.
where you don't have to get people to accept the Bible before you can rationally talk about it. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
important.
Well, I do want to ask you a little bit about the Bible
Sure,
for a
no, yeah,
minute, and I know you're not a textual critic, so I want to be very clear that we're not. But when it comes to, like, okay, so you talked about your first I guess methodology of talking about the historicity of the resurrection is this minimalist approach. So let's say we go beyond that. What are the because I'm thinking of Gary's Habermas's work in relation to, because I've heard and I've read several of his books, and it's like I walk away and I'm like, there are so many reasons, and and one of his arguments gets into the earliest sources aspect of it, and how, I mean, if we're just putting our thinking cap on and we're just trying to analyze the data, if we scrutinize the Christian earliest sources and compare it to like many other historically accepted events, the only reasonable conclusion is that that they're early sources. Can you talk about that a little bit, like, just for any of our listeners who might be wondering, like, hey, can we trust that, or was this legend and myth, or this idea that Christianity holds so near and dear, is there good arguments to support that it was reported well, I guess, so to
yeah,
speak?
yeah. So it's a big topic. So, first of all, just in terms of the actual sources we have handed down, we've just got, in terms of the Bible, it's not what I was, again, there are my stereotypes before I came to faith, and you still hear this, that, the Bible has been, handed down and translated and retranslated, over the years, so that this thing that you got in front of you on a Sunday, you have no idea, whether that's anything, that's actually happened. And that is, it's like the telephone game, right? So
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about. And it just isn't the way it was transmitted, right? So instead, what you have are say, like Paul's letters, to the Ephesians and the Colossians. You get a letter that's sent, and the letter gets copied and then recopied and then sent out, right? And so it's more, it's not serial. It's not one trans. It's not like there's just one document, after
Hmm.
another that's been following, and we just have to, take whatever we got here at the end. You've got, mass families, literally, thousands of manuscripts in Greek. So they're written in Greek. So there's no translating. If you learn Koine Greek now, right, then you can read the documents in the original language.
Hmm.
So just in terms of transmission, it's not the telephone game. We got a lot of documents. In terms of the reliability of, like, why I think that the first thing that was written down was any good. Well, first, that they do seem to be early. There's a debate here about, exactly when the Bible was started, when the letters that we think of the New Testament, right,
Hmm.
when they were started, and when it was finished. And some people have an earlier date, and some people have a later date. But it does look like something like, First Corinthians is probably going to be written within 20 years of Jesus being crucified. Um,
Yeah.
and the Gospels themselves, it seems like the fact that none of them mention the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, which is a really big deal, gives at least, some indication that they might be earlier than that. A lot of conservative scholars will think, at least like right up in maybe late 60s, but
Hmm.
they probably would have mentioned the fall of Jerusalem. As far as the information that you actually see in there, there's a whole, it's a big topic. One of the things I think are really interesting, though, is if it was made up, if it was just, a later document, maybe even the apostles themselves trying to, they're starting a new religion or something, right? And so they wrote it. If you just would not have, if I were writing a document, like an autobiography or something, a biography I'm really involved in, the idea of making yourself where you're trying to tell a story where you are like the leader of this new group, right? You're an apostle. You would probably not like come off looking so bad,
Yeah.
in the gospel. Like
Yeah.
Peter himself just does not come off. There's a couple of times, where he shines, but most of the time he comes off as really, uninformed and just kind of, laying it out there in ways that are they're a little embarrassing, right? And so, those sorts of things are indicators the indicators of authenticity, that this really happened, that there's embarrassing stuff in there, not just the apostles. They're always getting it right. They understood Jesus all along and everything's great. No, they didn't. They failed, again and again. That and then other little historical nuggets that get included, that Luke will include about who was in authority at this time, and we don't have independent sources for all of those, but it is pretty remarkable what we've done as a matter of archaeology. It turns out, these Luke especially is actually he's pretty careful, and he just keeps coming up right again and again and again. So bottom line is, if the things we can check turn out to work out historically, if we can verify them independently, then if there's other stuff we can't check, well, again, that's just the way it works for classical literature. When you're talking about things that old, there's just you just don't have that many documents. There's an awful lot of Plato and Aristotle that we don't have. We know that it was produced, but we don't have any copies of it. So when it comes to the Bible, no, we're doing great. in terms of ancient sources, you certainly can't compare it to anything else historically in terms of the documents that we have, and then reasons to think that it actually is based on eyewitness accounts. So no, can I get you all the way to something like inerrancy, which is what some people are, no, I can't get you that. Okay. General reliability. Yeah, I think there's quite a strong case for the general reliability of the New Testament, including the resurrection. And once you got that, like I said, early on, once you've got the resurrection, it's like you think that really happened. It's like, so you have this guy, and he said he was going to come back from the dead, even though people didn't understand what he's talking about, and he does. Right? It's like that does give you some reason. Especially from a Jewish perspective, like would God raise a heretic? Right? Probably not. So that gives you some reason to think, wow, we should really listen to what he had to say, because God has basically certified him by raising him from the dead. I don't need you to believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, to get that far.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, because to me, inerrancy is such a what do we mean by that word? And it's like, because I think Van Hoosen, I'm like, if I'm allowed to qualify the word inerrancy, I can check that box. But I think historically the church has, and Michael Bird's made this argument about, infallibility is a better word, but you get to infallibility via the reliability aspect, right?
Yes,
because
the authority. N.T. Wright likes authority better. And I do think inerrancy, if you look like when did that term start being used, it's one of those times where you have more conservative people that are trying to not be somebody else. Right? We don't want to be these liberals. We don't want to be these people, in the social gospel, and to kind of like say, how we're different. They invent this new term, inerrancy, and then everyone rallies around that flag. But that's a really bad way to do theology. I mean, historically, when you're trying to say, we're not them, and so what do we believe in opposition to them? That almost always is a problem. All the way back to the Reformation, that's a problem.
Yeah. Well, even before that, it was still a way that.
Sure.
It's like the church has a long history of doing that, right? And it's like it's not helpful a lot of the time.
Bad method. Really bad method.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So when you think about these strongest historical reasons, for you, there's what I've kind of heard from you is there's a lot of that word historical, that there's these things that are are, I guess, is it fair to say that they're demonstratably true, they're provable, they're widely accepted? Are those, because that's kind of, those are some hot button words, right? In some ways,
Yeah,
because people don't generally, because there's always a scholar out there, and I don't mean to pick on scholars, who
you're
will
right.
write a dissertation
Sure.
to, it's the most crazy thing, and they get funded and they do 35,000 words or 50,000 words, and it gets published, and you know, uh, so that's why I'm not trying to use the popularity argument in a unhealthy way, but it does seem like, if the majority of, like, for example, going back to the crucifixion specialists, if the majority of Roman crucifixion experts out there acknowledge that they were professionals at their trade, I mean, that should have some weight in the way that we're weighing evidence, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as like how, your question is really like how certain, and so can we prove it? Proof from a philosopher is a pretty strong word, right? I don't think
Mm-hmm.
we can prove, like, if proof means once you have the proof, like, you can't be wrong. To have
Yeah.
proof means you got it. It's locked down, can't be wrong. There's
Yeah.
almost nothing that can be proven. And so I don't need, in order, for the things I believe about God and Jesus. No, I don't have proof. Could I possibly be wrong? Yeah, I could possibly be wrong. Paul says that himself, right? He says, like, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then we're really, more pitiful than anybody else, in the
Yeah.
world. So he takes it that, yeah, it's possible that I could be wrong, but that isn't by itself. That's not a problem. I could be wrong about, I can, you talk to the wrong philosopher and he'll try to argue that, like, you don't exist. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
people will believe in lots of stuff. The
Yeah.
question is it rational, right? Is it rational? Is it, in terms of, like, even the law courts, right? Is it what about the preponderance of evidence? That's one thing you'll hear in law, right? So overall, arguments for, arguments against. Is it more likely? 51%, right? Is it more likely that say the resurrection happened than not? I think that's easy. That's an easy bar to clear. Yes, I think we can get that. Can you get to beyond a reasonable doubt? I think we can get that. That's a stronger, that's what they use in criminal courts. And yeah, I think we can. I think the
Mm-hmm.
reasonable doubts in this argument we started with Habermas and all these alternative explanations. So we did swoon. There's a theory that, like, the disciples stole the body, maybe they hallucinated, again, on and on. So those are reasonable doubts. Insofar as we can defeat those, then yes,
Mm-hmm.
then we can get the belief in the resurrection, literal resurrection, beyond a reasonable doubt. Doesn't mean it's proof. Doesn't mean
Yeah.
doesn't mean we can't be wrong. Doesn't mean that something really, really weird didn't happen. But overall, is it rational, right? Should you believe in it? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that there's nothing irrational to believing that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead. It is not just a matter of faith, not even close.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, because I think about that in the sense of, the way that I've articulated it, maybe from a preaching perspective, is just that, and I know that you can get in trouble with saying that there is there is the Christian worldview. I understand that
Mhm.
that's can be problematic, but generally speaking, it seems like the Christianity is a reasonable worldview based off of the evidence, and so, but there's this thing called faith, right? There is we both said that there's not a leap of faith, right? Our faith is based off of evidence, and but it's not empirical certainty, right? That's kind of what you're saying, is it's based
Yeah.
on, yeah,
I,
reasonable, rational.
yeah. I mean, I would want to talk. This is, like, actually, if you want like a sermon topic, like, one of the really important things that that needs to be talked about somewhere along the line in churches. Like, what exactly is faith? Because if you'll hear it used in a lot of different ways that are incompatible. And so for some people, it is something where, you might have some evidence, but you don't have enough evidence to believe. And so then you just believe it, whatever it is. You just believe it by faith. So faith just becomes an act of will, right? You
Mm-hmm.
just you just choose to believe. And I don't see that as biblical faith at all. I don't think that is at all what the word. So the English word faith, right? It's a translation of the Greek word pistis. And pistis, one of the ways it's often translated is not faith, which is kind of a churchy word, but just trust, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a church. It's a very common Greek word. Okay. And very often it's just going to be trust. So you're going to use it. So if you have a trustworthy person, they want to, you have a friend who needs a loan, but you think they're a trustworthy person, then you're going to have faith in that person. Pistis applies to you and your faith in that reliable person. So, that's the sort of way they would use the term faith. And it's exactly what I want to say about Jesus and the resurrection, that I have the reason you can trust your friend is because you have a background, right? You've seen that person be trustworthy in the past. There's a basis for it. You have a rational basis for your trust that the person actually will, do what they said they're going to do in the future. That's exactly the view of faith I think we bring, to Christianity. It's exactly the view that's taught in the New Testament, that it isn't just choosing to believe. It's based on what we know. Paul's going to give you all these reasons why you should believe that Jesus actually, Caesar is not Lord. It's actually Jesus. Okay. And here's why. And then based on that, you trust on the other promises that you have in Scripture that you can't verify. Right. There's lots of things then that we do now have to trust in God, trust in what Jesus has promised, that we can't, because it's about, it's about our lives, it's about the afterlife, about the future. But the sense in which we have faith, it's exactly like having faith in a trustworthy person. There's really nothing weird, nothing churchy, nothing supernatural about the notion of faith. It's a really very, very common, view. At least it was in the first century, that now has, I don't know, I know one encyclopedia piece on this, which will give you like 7 different, definitions of faith.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the core one, really, it's just trust. So here's another thing about that then. That means that faith and reason are not in conflict.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll hear that faith and reason are in conflict. I would say, no, look, faith is based on reason. Faith is based on evidence, not in conflict. You can't have faith in this friend of yours unless you have some reasons to believe that they actually are trustworthy. At the very least, the testimony of somebody else that you trust.
Mm-hmm.
You got some reason to trust this person. That's faith. And so that's a very different notion of faith, I think, than a lot of people in churches, the way they'll use it. And I think getting clear on that would really be beneficial. I think it's actually a really important point about clarity, that the way we use the word now isn't really quite often the way we the word, what it means in the Bible.
Yeah, no, that is actually kind of, as you were sharing, I was just thinking about how, I think there's probably far more important and necessary, and would be helpful in distinguishing that, because I think a lot of people in the church, I mean, we're so influenced by society and culture, and it seems like faith is like this magical feeling. It's just a feeling, and it's, which is different, because I always think of that word as trust. And maybe it's just because we probably read a lot of the same literature from different biblical scholars.
If you know a little bit of Greek, it's really not a hard case to make. So.
No, and I've really come around to the idea of allegiance, in the aspect of what faith looks like, right? Is trusting, is pledging allegiance to Jesus. It's but the whole time you were speaking right there, I kept thinking about how, Paul, it's interesting, the sermons, quote unquote, in the book of Acts from Stephen on through, there's almost, depending on the audience, but when they're speaking to Jewish, I guess, audiences, there is a recounting of the faithfulness of God throughout history. So Perfect. It's like, listen, God has demonstrated his trustworthiness time and time and time, because Stephen's sermon is just like a perfect example of that, right? Where it just lays it all out, the whole history of God with the people of Israel, and then it culminates in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, right? It's like that's the capstone moment. So well, I think that was really helpful as far as some of the I guess the different reasons why it's reasonable or rational to trust in the resurrection of Jesus. We've mentioned a little bit about some of the common objections a bit. And so, like we were saying, swoon is no longer really one. I hear a lot because I mean I think from different like the I guess the new atheists, and now we're like, what are we on the fourth or fifth generation of the new atheists?
New
The fourth.
atheists don't make a lot of noise. Yeah,
Yeah, what
even the new
happened?
atheists, even Richard Dawkins now considers himself a cultural Christian, right?
I know, I saw that. I was
Yeah, it's
like,
great.
wait,
So
what? Yeah.
they're just not.
Um,
Yeah, they have not
yeah.
had a good run. So
Yeah. So, I mean, but actually, that could be a whole episode we could talk
yeah,
about
no,
on
it
another
could.
one. I was like, yeah, because it is interesting. You know what? 25 years ago, the four horsemen of
Oh
the,
yeah.
yeah. And, so I'm curious because I have heard, now it seems like almost everybody from a critical perspective acknowledge that people believed that Jesus was raised from the dead. And so now you're hearing a lot more. It seems like there's a lot more. Like one of the main objections is like they were just misinformed or they misunderstood or they kind of spiritualize it. Is what do you feel like are the if we're going to strong man an opposing perspective, what are the main like maybe the top two or top three objections to the resurrection today?
I think for what you just said, it's pretty close to a more a popular objection based on hallucination, right? So they believed it because they had some sort of experience, but it wasn't real. Really wasn't Jesus. So two things. One, a lot of and critical scholars will give you that Jesus' tomb was found empty. Right, you do have multiple accounts in the Gospels that Jesus' tomb what was found empty, and even if you don't have that, it's like why if it was just something they were misinformed about or whatever, some the second generation misinformed about, someone could have checked, right? Someone could have gone to the tomb to see if the body is there. And in fact, the Jewish authorities, who once they realized that Christianity doesn't seem to be going away, right? Really easy way to stop it would just go find the right tomb and
Yeah.
and drag Jesus's bloody body out of there. And it's like, no, look, he's not risen. He's right here. Okay. So anyone could just produce the body to show what the real deal was, if this really is just a matter of legend or something along those lines. The other one, the one I'm not sure if I mentioned this one, but the one that's just kind of a killer for many of these alternative explanations is Paul, right? So Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus, right? First of all, he's not bummed out that Jesus is dead. He's glad
Yeah.
Jesus is dead.
Yeah.
He's a young hotshot Pharisee. Everything's going great. He's got permission to go and hunt down these Christians in Damascus, try to stamp this thing out. So like he's not bummed that Jesus. He's not in a bad mood. He's not expecting to see Jesus. Doesn't want to see Jesus. Jesus is just another guy, right? Another heretic. And then on the road to Damascus, something happens where Paul himself, believes, actually Jesus of Nazareth, the risen Jesus of Nazareth has appeared to me. And so that one really is, and we've got kind of the account of that happening is in Acts, and then Paul tells you also in his letters a little bit about what happened there. So we've got it in more than one place. That one's really hard. Like, what do you do with Paul, right? So this wasn't a matter of some rumor of Jesus coming to life. This isn't wishful thinking, right? Because this isn't what Paul wanted to happen. Doesn't look like it's hallucination because he wasn't expecting it to happen. Psychologists today will tell you that people, and it does happen. Hallucinations happen, but it's often based in part on our expectations. This was not something Paul had expected. So somehow you got to have a theory that accounts for Paul's conversion. Something really, really weird happened to him that obviously completely changed his life, to the point that he was willing to die for it. Right. That's another thing. Both Paul and then all the other apostles. The only one of the remaining 11 who lives in the old age is John, right?
Yeah.
And John dies in exile, according to church history. And you could dispute this, but from what church history tells us, like all the other 11 were martyred.
Yeah.
So, it seems like if you weren't sure about what was happening here, if you thought maybe you were misinformed, or maybe it was a hallucination, you would just recant, right? Based on, rather than being tortured to death, the much easier thing to do would just say, no, I made this up, or,
Yeah.
something, right? Um, but you don't have it, right? We have no Roman accounts, no Jewish accounts of any of the 11 recanting. And I think Josephus in particular, I think he would mention it, right? If this were happening, if people were somewhere down the line, giving this stuff up, we'd have some record of it somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that was always like, for me, that became kind of a pretty big argument, was that people don't die. I don't know who made that argument initially, but it was like, people wouldn't die for a lie type of thing, and yeah, I mean, because you're seeing it now. I mean, a lot of people are starting to, I think in
Just jump in though.
politics.
If you knew it's a lie, right?
Yeah.
Like the apostles themselves would have known. So maybe
Yeah.
you could convince some very zealous, second, third generation, but the first generation, if it was a lie, they knew it was a lie.
Yeah.
And so would they be willing to die, for the lie?
Yeah.
That's the one that you really are going to struggle with.
Yeah. And then, but also too, it's like people will lie to further their agendas or get ahead, of their personal, right? Like I might lie if I can, I hopefully wouldn't, but I mean, people might lie if they're going to like, I'm going to get rich off of this, like a lot of people do that, but none of these people, like you pointed out, they, except for John, they were all beheaded or crucified or, things like that. So
If
yeah, well,
they had started some sort of, if they were like televangelists today, right? They're
totally.
living in really big homes. They got this. I think if that were the case, if we knew that's what happened with the apostles, I think probably I would not be a Christian today, right? Because you would the idea of that it being fraud, so that they would benefit from it, would just be really plausible. But yeah, they just didn't, right? They did not have these, fat, happy lives, afterward. They're persecuted, right? Once the Roman authorities realized that these people really aren't Jews. If you were a Jew, you had kind of protected status within the empire. You were recognized, it's one of the recognized religions. And they didn't even have to offer sacrifices to the emperor. They got like an exemption for that. So the very earliest Christians kind of were just treated as a Jewish sect. But once it was recognized, no, actually this is something rather different. Well, now all bets are off, right? And the persecution of Christians becomes, pretty strong.
Yeah. I mean, that's for me, the first 300 years of church history is kind of for me, the kind of the nail in the coffin for some of these arguments, because it just, not only were all the initial apostles persecuted heavily, but you had that pretty consistently, for the next 250 years, at least up until Constantine, where it was like, it wasn't a really positive thing to be labeled a Jesus follower,
That's right.
it was, so not only do you have, I mean, it's like no one's getting rich. No one's furthering their own estates and their own kingdoms, right? It isn't until the Christendom really where that became, a problem, which I know we both would be like, yeah, that was a problem. That was not a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The church was healthier when it was still being persecuted. So
yeah. What is that? Justin Martyr. I think it was Justin Martyr who said the seed of the church is the blood of the saints or something, it's
Right.
So it grew. Well, that's been really helpful. Before I jump into a couple last question, really, I would love to know, so if somebody is looking at, what are your top, resources that you would recommend? You've mentioned Habermas's Gary Habermas's works, and he's written. I own 8. I don't know.
The resurrection really is the center of his scholarship. Yeah, always has been.
Yeah, so I'll have a link in the description for a bunch of his books. N.T. Wright, The Resurrection of the Son of God.
That's the most scholarly one. It's a tome, right? But it is in terms of his credentials, just in the scholarly world. Wright is more of a heavyweight than Habermas. people will write Habermas off as an evangelical. And he also writes, a lot of more popular level stuff. And so, the esteem of Gary Habermas, right, is just not as high as N.T. Wright. But as far as if you want to understand the stuff we've been talking about today, yeah, Gary's stuff is really good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think like Gary, like for me, just from my perspective, I think Gary is like accessible for a Christian person to be able to read, to be able to know that your arguments are not crazy. It's reasonable, and also to probably empower and resource you to be able to have some of those conversations with normal, folks. I think if you were a philosopher at a university, you might want to read N.T. Wright. Right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Are there any other, you mentioned Josh McDowell, I think More Than a Carpenter, right? That was
very easy, very accessible. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
William Lane Craig is a well-known, Craig's interesting in that he's a professional philosopher. He writes at a very high level. He's got, very scholarly stuff, but he also, writes upon, most of us can't write at different levels. But Bill is very good with that. So it just kind of depends on the topic. But if we're really talking if we're talking about general apologetics, J.P. Moreland, another former professor of mine, William Lane Craig, very good. But if we're talking about the resurrection specifically, then it's far and away it's Gary Habermas, and then that one book by N.T. Wright. Those are the really main sources for sure.
Yeah, and N.T. Wright's book, we need to reiterate, don't go buy it if you're not into really high level academic stuff.
Get it by interlibrary loan, if you want to have a peek, but it really is. This is so Wright also is one of those people who can publish at a very high level and a more popular level, and usually the ones at the high level are these really thick tomes. So just know that, that's what you're getting. I recommend, if that's what you want, and it's good stuff. I really like his more scholarly stuff, but that just, again, depending on what your needs are, that may be a little bit more, than what you absolutely need.
That's right. Yeah. Well, let's kind of wrap up with this then. Just in this is maybe more just us having a conversation as followers of Jesus, about the resurrection, shaping our lives today, and maybe some of the practical, I don't want to say pastoral, but as a pastor, I'm thinking about some of the pastoral things. But when you were just talking about N.T. Wright, I was thinking about how probably his most popular book, I think, would be Surprised by Hope. I think that's probably safe to say, and that's been one of the most influential books. I mean, he's written so many. It's like he writes a book every 15 minutes, it seems.
He does.
Like. But yeah, it's but in Surprised by Hope, which is built a bit on it's built on the resurrection. It's in the sense of like everything that flows out of it for eschatological, both personal and I think, collective, the new creation, all these motifs, how do you see the resurrection, shaping just, Christian life? And just in the scheme of, everyday life, you're a philosophy professor. I'm sure that, you have mornings where you don't have enough coffee. Does the resurrection get into that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you have two big events. You have Good Friday, and so you have Jesus' death and the atonement. But I think it is important. Like it didn't. If all that's important is that our sins are forgiven, then the story could just end with Good Friday, right? You had the sacrifice, and so now and that's all you need for atonement. But the story doesn't end there. You have the resurrection. So I think at least in part, I think it's showing us that it isn't. Sometimes Christians, and I've done this myself, and when I was in campus ministries in college and stuff like that, a lot of evangelicals, we think like it's getting people saved, right? And getting them so that they've said the prayer, they're going to heaven, right? And that's everything. That really is the Christian message, and that's really that's all that's important. But it isn't. If really the atonement is all, if that itself is the gospel, and I don't think it is. I don't think you can boil the gospel down to just that. then really his ministry could have been like an hour. He just like lays it out. Here's what I'm going to do, right? You know about Old Testament sacrifice? I'm going to be the sacrifice, right? And then he goes and gets crucified, and then boom, that's it. But instead, he teaches. He teaches for 3 years about life. Right, he goes on, and he's got a lot of stuff to teach about the kingdom of God. And so I think what the resurrection is doing is it's another step in the already and the not yet to bringing about the institution of the kingdom of God. Jesus is now alive. He's ruling. He really is our Lord. Yeah, Lord, and that when you say Jesus is Lord, you're not saying Jesus is God. You're saying Jesus is like King. So if you had asked a person in the first century who's not a Christian, like, do you have a Lord? Like, who is Lord? Everybody would say, oh yeah, Caesar is Lord. Everybody knows, Caesar is Lord. And the Christians were the ones saying, well, actually, no, there's actually this other guy, right? And Jesus is Lord. Jesus can be Lord because Jesus is alive. Right? Jesus didn't just die. He came back and now is our living Lord, the living sovereign that we walk and live under his kingdom. So yeah, if you don't have the resurrection, you don't have all that. And presumably you don't have the Holy Spirit. Right? Because at least Jesus says that, he's good. Part of the deal is he's going to send the Spirit on his behalf. So, I guess God, the Father could have had other plans and that's it, but it looks like that, Jesus is involved in the Spirit. So yeah, I think the resurrection isn't just a nice story. Oh, isn't it nice that Jesus came back from the dead? I think it's pretty pivotal. Not just in terms of like getting people to believe that, Christianity is true, that's been part of our discussion here, but just in terms of, in terms of the kingdom of God, it's not a footnote. It's a really pivotal event for us.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, man. Yeah. It's like central, the words like primary, foundational, central, well, I think actually you mentioned, I think this is important to, when we talk about what is the gospel, a lot of people have reduced the gospel to this, like, I don't know, a bite-sized one sentence thing. But when Paul, in 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4, lays out what is central or primary, he mentions Jesus' death for us, but he mentions the resurrection, and then he mentions the evidence for it too, right? Like for him, that was central, and it follows everything in his letters. But you mentioned the sending of the Spirit, but also I think too, like what does happen to us when we die? That is a pressing question that many people, philosophers have been arguing about that for thousands of years, right?
Absolutely.
And Jesus his resurrection is the first fruits. The first fruit, but it is through that the New Testament traces out our future resurrection. And for me, I'm just thinking about how I've been meditating on this, or I guess not meditating. That'll sound weird about what I'm about to say, what I was meditating on. But there's a person I know who lost their son. I think their son was like 20 years old. And the way that they navigated that as a follower of Jesus was a testimony, because they wrote a lot about it and were just processing this loss, and as a father of 5, that is to me the greatest fear that I have. Most things in life will not affect me. I'm like, I got pretty thick skin.
Yeah.
But like the loss of a child would be, it would seemingly be insurmountable except for what I'm about to say. And it's the presence of the Holy Spirit. And then there's also this other hope that we have, right? We have this hope that we too will be resurrected. And Paul talks about that in 1 Thessalonians 4, about how we don't grieve without hope. We have hope that there will be a future resurrection, and it's based off of the first resurrection of Jesus, right? Like that is the foundation for it. So I guess kind of what we're hitting at is that we're not saying that the resurrection is central or it's important because of Easter. It's not just about bunnies, and it's
right.
It's a little more to that, right? It is an everyday. The resurrection changes everything. It really does.
in terms of the first fruits, this is one that we could keep bringing up N.T. Wright, but one of the things he just continually hammers on is a misperception that like our goal, the end game for us is to go to heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Wright's like, actually, you look
Yep.
at the Bible, you look at Revelation,
It's not that.
it's new heavens and a new earth, right? It is
Yeah.
a bodily existence. So
Yeah.
yes, you say as Jesus as the first fruits, it is an example that, so Paul does say our bodies are going to be changed. It's going to be, it isn't just not going to have the same body exactly, which is good, right? So all the flaws, and diseases and stuff go away. But Jesus is an example. Jesus rose bodily. He was not in disembodied spirit. Right.
Mm-hmm.
He really, he had a body. So that does seem to be an example of that we are going to have something like that. It is going to be an embodied existence. And it's not, we're not spirits, we're not angels.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole other thing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Floating around. With harps and stuff. So we're going to have an embodied existence and stuff to do, which I think is great. I think it's very exciting. But it does, it is a little bit in contrast to some of the pictures, at least I had. I remember there was a TV show. Maybe they would show this around Easter. I think it was called The Littlest Angel, where this kid dies and it's showing him becoming an angel. Like he's earning his wings and stuff.
It's like one of those Hallmark movies or something.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's a sweet little story and stuff. But, theologically, it's like, no, look, this is really confused. But I think it also was a pretty popular image in society. And so bodily resurrection just breaks through, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I last summer. So every summer we don't have small groups. So we have small groups 2 times throughout the year. We use a kind of a trimester model, and so our summer times we'll have a couple small groups. But I normally teach classes. Like I'll teach a Wednesday night class. And last year I succumbed. I've never done an eschatology one because I'm just. Honestly, part of it's because of my freshman year in college, where it's all we did was debate the timing of the rapture.
Yeah, sure.
That's what it's like. So I'm just like, I'm not going to be that guy. But actually, when the Israel Gaza situation happened, October 6th, a couple of years ago, I did a sermon series, and I was like, let's just try this. It seems like a lot of people were asking, is this the end times? So I did an Israel, the church, and the end times sermon series. And I think we grew by like 30 people. It was crazy. We had so many new people come in. Yeah.
Huh.
Because everybody wanted to know, which I was like, so I think my disdain about pop and folk theology prevents me sometimes from probably doing what I should do in order to serve.
I get that completely. Yeah.
It's just like part of me. Right. But so anyway, I did this class and it was 3 months long or 2.5 maybe. And I worked over I think what I did is I started out by doing the general hermeneutical questions about different approaches to end times. So premillennialism, amillennialism, postmillennialism. And I made it very clear that dispensational premillennialism is not an option in the vineyard. Don't come here if you hold that view. No, I'm sorry. And post-mill. But anyway, but it was interesting when we worked through the book of Revelation. I basically just worked through it and kind of explained kind of the way I understand it. But when it came to the personal eschatology thing, I want to say 95% of the, it was probably 30 to 40 people in the class were shocked to learn that we don't go to heaven. Shocked. And that was an interesting moment for me. I was like, I'm not a good pastor because the things that I assume everybody knows.
Yeah.
They're all being influenced by what you just said, and it's not that Hallmark movie anymore. Now it's TikTok or, whatever social media posts, or we just say things in passing. Because even though I know the Bible does say there is a new heaven, new earth, and we're going to be on the new earth where, there seems to be at the end of Revelation a pretty clear picture. It's hard to maybe understand all the details of it, but it seems like we're here, right? We're not on clouds with halos.
Right.
And yet pastorally, in certain situations, I will wrestle with that question of how do we get to heaven? And I always lead, that's the question that leads to faith in Jesus and whatnot, but I don't spend time, actually.
I know. It's a fine shorthand, because to get into other topics. But at
Yeah.
some point, you probably should raise, the idea that that's really not the end game.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I really appreciate your time. I love, it's been great getting, building this friendship with you. And I love being able to ask you philosophy questions and have you recommend papers that are $150 or whatever the last few
For
books.
you and your 6 listeners who really want to hear from a philosopher, yes, I'm glad to be back for the third time. So yeah.
No, it's been great. I've actually had quite a few people that have, let me know how the Calvinism Arminianism one was interesting too, because especially in the vineyard, because there's, a lot of the listeners of this podcast are just vineyard leaders or
Mm,
pastors or vineyard adjacent people. And there was a number of people who were like, yeah, I was kind of trying to figure out like, where is the vineyard on that one, which is, I'm like, when you figure that out, let me know.
yeah, yeah.
Let me know. But no, it's been really fun. So yeah, okay. So is there anything like, what do you got upcoming? You writing any new papers on anything that's gonna get published?
I got actually sometime here very soon. There's a University of the St. Andrews Encyclopedia of Theology asked me to do an entry on quantum mechanics and theology.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
that is in copy editing right now. So that could be out, really tomorrow at any time. So some of your people might, maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
you hear all sorts of, weird stuff out there about quantum mechanics that
Yeah.
might be helpful. And then I got a paper that's in the works on the notion of the multiverse. So everybody
Yeah.
knows it from Marvel, and it's all over sci-fi and fantasy. And there's some scientific reasons to think possibly. I myself am a multiverse skeptic, and so my paper is trying to show why, based on what we know today, you should probably probably be pretty skeptical that what God has created is
Mhm.
actually a multiverse. So those are a
Yeah.
couple of things that I'm working on now.
So, for those mere mortals who don't have academic library, I do have access to one. Thank God I have a hookup. But will any of these things be available online at all?
Oh, if not immediately, well, the St. Andrews Encyclopedia of Philosophy is online. It's all online, so
Okay,
you can look that up right now and see what else they got. Tons of stuff out there, uh,
great.
and it's all free. It's all online.
Okay,
I will have
I'll get that. I'll get that from you, and I'll post a link. So for those of you who
okay,
are, hey, I'd love to read that.
the
I'll post a link in the
multiverse
bottom.
paper. I think I might have a draft of it on my academia.edu site.
Okay.
So if you really wanted to, a lot of my stuff, there's a website called academia.edu
Hmm.
where a lot of academics will put preprints to their papers. So sometimes for copyright reasons, they can't give you the published version with the page numbers and all. They can give you
Hmm.
a preprint where the information is almost exactly the same, but it's just
Yeah.
not something in a format that you could cite. So I've got almost all of my stuff, including a couple of books you could get to through my academia.edu site. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think I posted that last time. I'll post that again too. Yeah. So, I just know that website is always trying to get me to subscribe because there's all these papers with my name in it,
I know,
and
I know.
yeah, I'm like,
They got to pay the bill somehow. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's actually, this is totally a side tangent, but it is very interesting because I mean, again, as being involved in academics, there is a thing inside of us that being cited, right? It's like it is our kryptonite because part of us like was like, oh my gosh, I got to know, and then they have figured out a way to monetize it. It's genius
yeah,
because
yeah.
there's so many times where I'm like, I want to know what this UK theologian has said about something I wrote, and I'm like, yeah, so I can dispute it.
Yeah, no, I understand. I like it. There are other places. For philosophers, there's a site called Phil Papers. There's also
Yeah.
another site called ResearchGate. And so I try to keep my stuff up on all of those. I just
Okay,
find that
cool.
academia.edu is pretty user friendly. I mean,
Oh,
it's pretty nice. So
and I mean, when I was in grad school, it was super helpful because I was able to get access to papers that I couldn't get through the Birmingham library. I was
yeah,
able to find them on there, and it was really really helpful because there were a ton of Wimber and Vineyard UK papers that were written by like Presbyterians about talking about the influence of Wimber and the Vineyard on Presbyterian churches. Yeah. And I was like, that was interesting to me. So
Sure.
cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening, folks. And Jeff, thanks for jumping on another episode. I'm sure we're going to have you back again, Lord willing, because it would be really great talking to you. And everybody else, thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, follow. I don't know, do whatever you got to do. So talk to you guys soon.